Hey there, and welcome to another Ask Me Anything session where I'm answering your questions about the publishing industry and about writing a better book. Thank you to everyone who has submitted a question. It's been such a pleasure getting to answer them in this more candid way, and I hope you've been finding the responses helpful. I also want to mention a resource that I created recently, which is a story self-assessment that you can grab for free via the link in my description below. If you have a work in progress, it is going to help you evaluate your own story to determine its strengths and weaknesses and set a game plan for your revision strategy. So I hope you find it useful. It's also going to sign you up for my exclusive newsletter launching soon with even more tips and resources. So let's dive into some more questions. We have some good ones today. So first question, I had a question about writing a series. Would you recommend writing multiple books within the series while you are querying your first installment, or try to get the first one published before jumping into the next? And on a similar note, when pitching any manuscript to agents, would you begin another project at the same time or wait till after you've reached a conclusion on your first manuscript, whether you get an agent or decide to shelf the project indefinitely? Okay, so to tackle the first part of this question about whether you should work on the next installments in the series while you are querying the first one. This is ultimately a personal decision, and I think it comes down to your commitment to publish the books as a series. When you are querying, the hard truth is that there is no guarantee that you are going to get a literary agent's representation, and even when you get representation, there's no guarantee that you are going to get your book published. So think about it from that perspective. Do you still want to work on this series and perhaps maybe self-publish the series if you are unable to get a literary agent's representation and or a book deal? If the answer is yes, I want to publish this no matter what, then absolutely continue working on the next books in the series as you are querying to get representation for the first one, which is absolutely the right strategy, by the way, because the literary agent is in most cases going to have to sell the first book in the series on its own before selling the next installments. So the fact that you are querying with just that first book is the right approach. As for working on your next projects when you are querying in general, absolutely, why not? In many cases, when an agent is interested in representing you, they're going to ask what your next books are, if you have any planned. So if you already have a work in progress, that's something that you can discuss with them. And they'll be excited to see that you do want to continue your writing career, because they will ultimately be looking to represent you for the long haul throughout any projects that you write. So absolutely no reason not to jump into that next project while you are querying one. In fact, I find that in many cases it helps writers get their head out of the querying game, which can admittedly be extremely exhausting and disheartening. So it's actually often very positive for you to start thinking about another book when one is currently under querying. Okay, here's another question that relates to publishing a series. I have a question that I haven't seen asked yet. If my book is a series and I self-publish the first two books, will a publisher want to publish the third book in the series? Technically, the third installment is still new and no one has seen it yet. And if I can prove to them I have previous sales and an audience with my first two books, would that make a publisher more willing to sign me? Great question. I think that frankly, it is unlikely that a traditional publisher is going to want to publish the third installment in the series without having published the first two. Unless your book is doing extraordinary numbers, in which case, of course, they're going to want to get a piece of that pie because that's what publishers want. They want to make a buck at the end of the day. In that case, I could see them say they're interested in publishing the third installment, and it could even be a case that they want to reprint or republish the first two. But those are really, really, really rare cases. And as I said, it's likely that you would need to be at best-selling level for the series already for that to happen. The other way I could see this happening is if the third installment in the series actually works really well as a standalone. If a person who is entirely new to your series can jump into that one and have a wonderful experience and the story is contained in and of itself, then it is possible that you can query literary agents and pitch the third installment as a standalone, of course referencing that you self-published the first two. But if it is a completely dependent storyline that necessitates the first two books, I see it being really difficult for you to publish just the third through the traditional publishing path. Okay, here's another question. My question is about using contractions. The nature of my story leans toward the use of them. Megan didn't like the color, rather than Megan did not like the color. When I've researched this, the general advice is not to use them, but I find this holds up the natural flow of the story and makes my work sound false and forced. As a narrator, I often write of things from my main character's perspective, how she would say, think things. And this sounds much better using such contractions. What do you think? Absolutely use contractions. I would say the vast majority of books would use contractions exactly for the reasons that you outline. It's how we talk. It sounds more natural. So definitely use the contractions in any dialogue where a character would use them. But I do think it is fair game to use contractions in the narration as well, especially if you are writing in first person or close third person. Because with those perspectives, the reader is expecting that we are inhabiting that character's mind fully, which means we do expect the narration to, on some level, reflect their own natural voice. So I think for those reasons, contractions are fair game. Also, they help the reader move through the text quicker and more swiftly, as you outlined. So I really don't see any reason why you need to separate them out and use the more formal structure. Here's a great question. Is there any genres that you think would be best to just self-publish instead of traditional, like horror or short stories, etc.? Thanks. I actually have a whole video coming up on this exact topic, which is genres that traditional publishers typically will not publish. So I'll give you a little teaser here regarding the two that you mentioned. Horror is absolutely fair game for traditional publishers, and in fact, I had a video earlier this year of the top book trends for 2022, so I'll link that in the description. But one of the trending genres I saw was horror. A lot of literary agents were requesting horror on their manuscript wish lists, so I think that is absolutely fair game to pursue via the traditional publishing path. As for short stories, you are going to have more of a challenge getting a literary agent's representation and getting a book deal through a Big Five house for a short story collection. So in many cases, it's actually easier for you to find publication for short stories via a literary journal or magazine that do not require a literary agent's representation. It's not off the table, but publishers are typically not looking for story collections in the way that they are looking for full-length novels. So definitely stay tuned for my video where I go through this in a bit more depth and share some of the other genres that traditional publishers typically won't take on. Here's another question. I have 200 out of my 400 pages manuscript pretty much done. The second half needs a bit more rewrites. Will you recommend me sending out queries to agents now or wait until the book is fully done? Always wait until your manuscript is complete. And the reason is when you send out a query, what you are hoping for is the agent coming back and requesting to read the full manuscript, because when you query them, you typically only submit the first 10 or so pages or first chapter, whatever they ask for. And if they come back to you and say, yeah, I want to see the whole thing, and you don't have it ready, that just looks like you weren't quite ready to query to begin with, and you kind of kickstarted the process a bit prematurely. You absolutely want to have the entire manuscript written before you begin querying. And I would recommend too that you have someone else read the manuscript and offer you constructive feedback before you begin the querying journey. This could be a critique partner, a beta reader, or you could hire a professional editor. I strongly recommend against you being the only one who's ever seen the novel before you send it out to agents. There are cases that writers have gotten representation that way, but it is much more likely that you will have a more polished and stronger story if you first work through some feedback, because it's so rare that the first draft is the draft that ends up getting published. Typically, writers will work through several drafts on their own, working through some big picture developmental structural edits before reaching out to literary agents, because once you reach out to a literary agent and they reject you, they're pretty much off the table for representation for that particular book. And because of that, you want to put your best foot forward and put the strongest manuscript possible in front of them. So I would, in your case, probably slow down the process, finish the book, work on it in terms of getting feedback, and then going through the revision process on your own before beginning the querying journey. I hope you're finding these Q&A videos helpful and interesting. If you are, please hit that like button and subscribe if you haven't already. It would mean a lot to me. Also, make sure you grab my free story self-assessment. Link is in the description below. I just want to say thank you so much again. Leave me any additional questions that you have in the comments here so I can feed them into my next Q&A video. As always, thank you so much for watching and happy writing.